Absolutely. Okay, so I'll get started. Thank you very much for joining me, Karen. It's wonderful to have you back on the show again. Groundbreaking research being brought to the public. How are you going?
I'm going good. It's lovely to speak with you again, Jeff. It's so good to see you. I've got to say, I love the videos where you go out onto the streets and you talk with your fellow Australians. I love those videos so much because we have to, unfortunately, be the media, because our media is fully infected with Freemason Demolays, and they lie to us, Jeff. They lie to us. So people like you doing a valuable job for the rest of us, playing your part in being what I call the bush telegraph, which is one Aussie talking to another.
Yes, I wish we were talking under better circumstances, but we're under attack from every different angle, it feels, here in Victoria, the police, the media and government. So it's good to do these broadcasts to let people know that we're still here fighting the battle, trying to get freedom and restore peace to this place. But yes, it's very diabolical here, what's taking place.
And it's interesting to note with Premier Daniel Andrews, educated at Galilean College in Melbourne, Freemason Demolay School, he had a clip up the other day where he was saying that there was two clips matched up. I forget who put it together, but it was really good because in one media thing he's saying, we thank the Prime Minister for his offer of assistance from the ADF. And yet when he was in the inquiry testifying, he was saying, oh no, that didn't happen. I actually played that on my YouTube channel for people the other night. The thing is, I don't really get why when your Premier is a proven liar, every Victorian should be out on their streets, not wearing a mask, not complying with any rules, regulations handed down by a lying Premier who's a proven liar. You know, he can't keep his story straight from one press conference to the next.
Exactly, and they want us to be afraid of reporting on them, scared to tell the news when they're the ones that are committing the crimes. They need to be held accountable for that. And this new omnibus bill, they want everybody to be afraid of sharing information on Facebook. They don't want that, and it's effectively working. People are afraid, so we need to have our voices heard.
And the question that needs to be asked, if you're in fear, what sort of life are you living? If you're in fear. What they're trying to do now is turn neighbour against neighbour, and we cannot allow that to happen. I was thinking about this omnibus bill last night. Now, this is about authorising basically anybody that they decide can come and enter your home and remove you or your children or whatever. And I was wondering, because given that they're going to be targeting political people who have an opinion, you know, just average Joe people who have an opinion, as we've seen, James Bartolo and Thanos Paniades and yourself indeed. Now, I was wondering, on a bigger scale, how does this pan out? So, say for argument's sake, Victoria should ask this, okay? Say for argument's sake, there's somebody in the Northern Territory speaking out, or somebody in Queensland or New South Wales speaking out. Does this also allow the Victorian government to petition the other state governments for extradition? Is Victoria going to become the political activists? And we're not even activists, we're just average Joes that went, you know what, this bullshit's too much now and we've got to start talking. But is Victoria going to become the prison state? Is it? Because it's certainly operating as a prison state now. The suicide level in Victoria is staggering. The amount of businesses that have been lost is staggering. The amount of unemployment is staggering, and this is going to snowball. People won't be able to pay their rent, they won't be able to pay their mortgage, and it's just going to snowball. I really struggle with the fact that my fellow Australians in all other states have not marched on the borders yet. I've been calling for weeks for the grey nomads to come and park their mobile homes out front of the state governors across Australia. I've been calling for the truck drivers to support such an action. by parking their trucks in and around to support those people. And then I'm asking the rest of Australians to get involved, get in your car, drive to the state governor of the state in which you live and demand that the government be removed. The window of opportunity, I believe, is actually closing here, Jeff. I really do believe that.
It certainly is. And
Because
the more people that conform and that are brainwashed and don't take a stance against this, the laws will be written, they'll be pushed through, and then we're all going to be crushed. I expected an uprising, people to go back and take what's theirs, state claim to these public facilities. I thought they would be ripping signs off and none of this would be pushed through, but being forced into compliance, everybody's wearing masks, and now we see some dreadful scenarios taking place, people driving vehicles off piers, trying to end their own life. None of the suicide figures are being reported on. It's dreadful. Yeah. China has taken over and they're implementing these new laws, and it seems everybody just feels helpless. We need to continue to keep up the courage for this fight, because it feels like resistance is futile unless we all take a stance.
Well, when people have nothing left, they also have nothing left to fear.
Yeah.
And that is fast approaching the tipping point of that, I believe. In relation to China, it's really important that people understand the Freemason connection into China began in the 1970s. And of course, 10 years later, we saw the culling of the population with the introduction of the one-child policy. Every sub-issue that is going on around the world, everybody needs to look at the top of the tree. Everybody needs to know the history of Freemasonry around the world. The ramping up really began in 1717. And I covered this many times on my Facebook page, which has been removed. And so clearly you're over the target. And people need to really Google and just spend 20 minutes researching the history of Freemasonry around the world, the history of Freemasonry through Europe, the history of Freemasonry through Asia. Google those words and read the text. It's really important that you understand it. Like last night I was covering Leopold II of Belgium, who is actually the first cousin once removed of Queen Victoria. They come from the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. Now, these are the Freemasons, you know, and we have Masonic lodges in every district across Australia, and most Australians know nothing about them. They are, in fact, the foot soldiers supporting this one world government takeover that we see happening right now. They are the foot soldiers of filth. Your high-ranking police officers, every politician, every judge, all of them arise out of a Freemason Demolay school. That's not a coincidence.
You're exactly right, Karen, and I've been exposing corruption behind Freemasonry for years. This octopus has stretched its tentacles into media, the legal industry. We see right throughout the court systems, all the way through to law enforcement. We're seeing it now, and now they're proudly boasting about this, bearing the compass and set square on the masks and billboards. They're coming out of the shadows, and now they're taking over. I've infiltrated a couple of lodges. I've seen it all happening before, and it's very compromised the way they look after each other. They've got each other's back, and that's how come they are able to commit these atrocious acts against the people and go undetected. This is something that needs to be...
Well, this is the thing. This is the thing. They're not really undetected. I mean, when you take into account Franco Arena, the New South Wales politician that outed this network of filth during the Woods Royal Commission, the network has been outed. Then you have to take into consideration Senator Bill Heffernan's speeches, multiple speeches, one of the most powerful being the one he did in 2002, which was 18 years ago. And then, of course, the most famous speech of 5 years ago. Now, the subtleties inside of Bill Heffernan's speech of the 20th of October 2015 outed the entire network, even down to the point where he said in one document, the 28 people named in this document, it's not so much their secrets that are the problem, It's when they keep each other's secrets that the judiciary becomes compromised. And those 28 people, I believe, are in fact the roll call keepers of the Freemason Demolay network. Who's bred with who, whose offspring belongs to who. And all of those people turn up in your media, your judiciary. They turn up as ranked police officers. They turn up as judges, politicians, bureaucrats, your high commissioners to London, your ambassadors, the whole box and dice. Now today, Jeff, I actually came across a list called The History of Freemason Names. And I've only just begun to work through it because it's a hell of a list. And as you do that, it gives you dates and times and which country and who was where and who was when. I've posted it on my YouTube, and when this goes to air, I'll post the link in the comments on your YouTube here.
Very good.
Because people really need to spend a little bit of time researching those names and following the timeline. Here's the problem. We live our life in our little lifetime, in our little 70 or 80 years. We don't give much thought to what happened 300 years ago. And yet, and all of us around the world know something's wrong. There is, it says here, your internet connection is unstable, Jeff.
I can
It's gone now.
from this end.
Okay. And then we look at the protests that are happening in Poland, London, Ireland, Australia, Canada, America. So average Joe people, we do know something's wrong. We know something's very wrong. But average Joe people still need to make the connection. These people are in fact the Freemasons. You've got to Google the history and rollout of Freemasonry across Asia, across Europe. You've got to understand their family tree, because the reality is they're all connected. Every politician in Australia, every bureaucrat, all the ambassadors around the world, all the royalty around the world, these people are actually connected. I understand the gravity of that sometimes can be overwhelming to think about. Start with researching Bill Gates. He's actually connected, related to people like, I think it was President Nixon and a few others. You see, they've had 300 years of this breeding program. So we're talking probably at least 60 or more generations of people. And yet most of us can only go back to our great-grandparents.
Very important facts that you've just listed there. And it's good that you're going after the organisation and targeting the individual people, not just the whole Freemasonry. So you got to go after the criminals that have committed these acts, and they guard each other's secrets very closely. And you're exactly right. The bloodline, it's all intertwined. That's how they control wealth and power. And that's how they are able to remain operating like this. Right. Because they
and it's up to us to deal with the here and now. You get a lot of people that want to talk about the alumni, or they want to talk about the cabal, or all this sort of stuff. These are all just a myriad of labels they use to confuse the masses. We've got to deal in our own backyard, and we've got to deal with the here and now. And the here and now, 42,041 fellow Australians contacted that Royal Commission into institutional and ritual sexual abuse. There are 3,953 testimonies, although heavily vetted, are available for you all to read. And it is through reading those testimonies that you start to understand how the web is spun. That's how I began to put it together, because you see common themes in reading these testimonies. And as you work your way through them, it was really like pieces of the jigsaw puzzle being put together. And then when I started to research, because I thought, well, pedophilia is a crime against children. So the first thing I need to know about all our politicians is, where did they go to school? And through doing that research, you start to see it's the same schools across the country over and over and over and over again, generation to generation. And then you research those schools, you find they are all Freemason, Demolay connected. Then, of course, there was reference tools that I used to cross-reference with. like the Australian Dictionary of Biography, most valuable tool of working out who they married, how many descendants they had, who those descendants were cross-married with, because that's what happens inside Freemason Demolay. They are actually paired up at the Demolay stage. They produce a couple of children, usually the marriage ends and they go their separate ways, but the line has continued.
Very important information. And
Goes right back to colonial days.
Yeah, and Rupert Murdoch, the media
Mhm.
giant, he went to Geelong Grammar School, which isn't far from here. And you got to follow the trail, don't you? And
That's right. And
it's very
Geelong Grammar
disturbing.
School has a long history and a well-documented history of pedophilia. It's
And
their normal.
what's really cunning is that they're getting brazen and openly admitting that some of these rules, sexual perversion and laws protecting children, should be removed because they're outdated. So they want
That's
to,
right. If you
be
go
able to
back
get away
to,
with it.
yeah, if you go back to Senator Bill Heffernan speech of the 20th of October 2015, he actually opens with Judge Gary Nielsen, New South Wales judge, known in the trade as Gorilla in Black Lace, who was sitting on a case where he decided, he said from the bench that sex with siblings should not be illegal and it should. Now, Senator Heffernan outed that 5 years ago. Judge Gary Nielsen still sits on the bench in the New South Wales court. Mark Speakman, who is the Attorney General now for New South Wales, he has nothing to say about it. And that silence convicts them now. You see, if you're not objecting to incest and child rape, that silence convicts you as being part of the network. So let's look at all the politicians, shall we? Pauline Hanson, for argument's sake, has been floating around since before 1996. She started as a councillor on the Ipswich Council. So she's been around for a very long time, over 20 years, silent on this issue. When Senator Heffernan gave his speech, you will notice he sits alone. There is not one politician sitting alongside him when he was calling for the terms of inquiry to include the institution of the law. You go on further to Senator Heffernan's speech, where he says he spoke with Royal Commissioner James Rowland Wood about why they did not explore who in the legal fraternity was frequenting the Costello's boys' brothel in Kellett Street, King's Cross. And the Commissioner did say, we've decided not to revisit that issue. The public would lose confidence in the judiciary. Well, that's a confession, isn't it, Jeff?
It most certainly
When the Royal Commissioner is saying that, that's a confession. And here we are now, 2020, and I would say a great deal of Australians have in fact lost confidence in the judiciary. I would suggest that every person in Victoria, as they actually sprint to poverty with the amount of jobs that have been lost, with the lockup mentally, I think a lot of people in Victoria are now awake to the fact the judiciary cannot be trusted. Well, it's not a matter of just stopping there. You have to look at what connects them all. What's the common denominator? Because there's not one politician in Australia calling out the scam. Not one.
Very alarming, isn't it? And it's twisted that it's a cycle of intergenerational abuse where the victim obviously a lot of the time becomes the victimizer in these cases. They're desensitized.
That's the Demolay portion?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the Demolay portion. As you read through those testimonies at the Royal Abuse Commission website under narratives, under the narrative tabs, if you use the toolbar and search by the word altar boys, you get multiple hits of people that have testified about altar boys. And this is where I started to understand what the Demolay portion is. The Demolay, of course, is for boys between the ages of 9 and 21 and the daughters of Master Masons. who are assigned to chapters of Demolay for the purpose of networking and filth. Now, in the course of reading through those testimonies, there were a number of children who testified that they were in fact abused by the altar boys. And you know, Jeff, when you sit down and read the inaugural speeches of our politicians, sometimes they call them maiden speeches, do you know there's lots and lots of them that have in fact been altar boys?
Yeah, that's right. See, so all this abuse becomes normal for them, and then in turn, they inflict that on others. So we need
That
to
seems to
break
be the
that
case.
cycle, and it's very disgusting. And there's so many victims that are afraid to step forward. And once they're tied and bound by their oaths, they're not going to step forward and out a lot of the members of these lodges because they are in fear of repercussion. And it's
Yeah, but
implemented.
at some point, Jeff, people have to decide for themselves where the line in the sand is. I mean, we've all been told about Prince Andrew, Epstein, the UK Prime Minister Heath, Margaret Thatcher, the many politicians at that time in the UK. We've also been told about things like Weinstein, and a myriad of others. The Me Too campaign, where they're supposedly all coming out and talking about it, and yet people still don't seem to be able to relate that to their own. Like I'm talking for Australians, they don't seem to be able to relate the connection to our country. And the same thing is currently unfolding in New Zealand. They currently have a Royal Commission into Institutional Abuse running here in New Zealand. And the thing is, Jeff, it's exactly the same situation. 2 weeks ago, there was a big announcement about one of the Freemason schools here known as Dilworth College. Now, that was first announced 2 weeks ago. In the media update of 2 days ago, they are now saying there has been more than 70 boys come forward to tell the police what happened to them inside that school. So exactly the same pattern is being repeated in New Zealand. Now, we had really good politicians in Franca Arena and Bill Heffernan who outed this network. And if people had have paid attention and stood up then, I believe we would not now have 6.5 million Victorians going through all of this abuse. Because you see, the Freemason Demolay, they are programmed into dining out, if you like, on the suffering and torture of people. That's what they feed off, I believe. And the suffering and torture, mental anguish, financial, that's going on towards our Victorians is in fact what they feed off. They feed off fear. And, you know, now they're trying to create situations where you're going to have neighbours dobbing on other neighbours. Good Lord, whatever you do, do not do that. Love thy neighbour.
Exactly. It goes against the Australian spirit, doesn't it? People are supposed to look after one another. You know, take your neighbour's bins in if they leave them out one time, or even mow their nature strip on the lawn. But now they have people looking over the fence, and as well, people are being vindictive. If someone has an axe to grind, they'll use these COVID restrictions as a way to get back and be spiteful at others. So it's bringing out the worst traits in people. And it is very disturbing as well. And the way Masonry is just infiltrated, and now they're proudly boasting about it. It's and it's very.
Well, the logo. I saw the Freemason logo on a Victorian Police media poster a couple of weeks ago. You know.
That's right. And when you have the media, like you said, they're talking about Prince Andrew, Epstein, and royal scandals, but you don't hear about the human hunting parties, the occult rituals, satanic blood sacrifices.
Well, I'll tell you a couple of things about the royal family. This is another thing. In the late 1800s, the grandson of Queen Victoria, his name was Prince Albert Victor, and he was involved in a thing called the Cleveland Street scandal in London. Now, if you Google the Cleveland Street scandal in London, it's initially reported as a homosexual brothel. Yet, as you read through the detail, it's not. This was of Telegram messenger boys aged between 9 and 17 being abused in this Cleveland Street brothel. Well, boys aged between 9 and 17, that's child rape.
Exactly.
That's not a homosexual brothel. And that was one of the times when I started to realise the control that the media has. Because after that scandal happened in the late 1800s, obviously the Freemason filth realised it was very important to control the media, which is in fact what they did. Even the invention of radio and televisions required a licence to be granted. Same with newspapers and all those sorts of things. And as you research the early media in Australia, you start to see, hang on a sec, everybody that was granted a radio licence or a television licence, all of them came out of a Freemason school. Every single one of them. And I was just like, oh my God, this is how they weave the web. This is how they spin the web. And then, of course, that led me to things like Matthew Newton. And I just want to talk about Matthew for a moment, if that's okay, Jeff.
Absolutely.
Matthew Newton is not mentally ill, okay? Matthew Newton comes from a family indoctrinated into this filth. You know, we had Bert Newton a few years ago at the Logies standing up making jokes about Graham Kennedy and Don Lane mentoring the young ones. If you knocked on their dressing room door and it was locked, you knew they were in there mentoring the young ones. Now, imagine being Matthew Newton for a moment. You are born into this family of filth. As a child, you are abused. You are also privy to how high this network goes in protecting itself. And when you become in your late teenage years, you start to become enraged at the injustice of that. And then this is also the same pattern that you will read in those near on 4,000 testimonies. As late teenagers, they start to substance abuse in order to numb the pain, continually reported in those testimonies. In their 20s, they often act out in rage, which we have seen with Matthew. I can understand the rage. Who do you tell when you know how the network is spun? And remember the words of Bill Heffernan. There is a former Prime Minister on this list, and it's a police document. Sadly, we have in Australia a compromise at the highest of levels. So imagine yourself as Matthew Newton in your early 20s, and you understand perfectly how this web is woven. And as soon as you start to act out, which is the normal pattern of behaviour, which is rage, you're labelled mentally ill. Mentally ill. Everyone's all of a sudden mentally ill. Okay? And that led me down another path, Jeff.
Yep.
Because that led me to the work of Dr. Rena Michelson, which led me to the information about channels 9, 10 and 7 and the timeline of Premier Jeff Kennett, which then led me to the timeline of John Howard. John Howard created the mental health organisation known as Beyond Blue and promptly appointed Jeff Kennett as the inaugural chair, because the organisation known as Beyond Blue is actually data gathering for people who are about to blow the whistle. People who know the network, know the injustice, know how the web is spun. And people like Matthew Newton, you just go, oh, they're mentally ill and write them off. Well, I'm telling you, Jeff, I've met Matthew Newton. He is not mentally ill. He's a young man who knows this network from the inside, I believe, and knows there'll be no justice until the average Joe people go, you know what? We're rising up now. We've had enough.
Well said. We see a lot of it with the child stars, don't we? They start exhibiting this
Sarah Monahan, hey Dad,
behavior. They try and suppress a lot of the emotions, and what they've suffered through with drugs and alcohol. And then people look at these people like they're acting out like they're criminal, that they've got something wrong with them, but you don't look at the root of the cause. All this.
That's right. There was another case I came across that was very interesting. Michael Eastman was his name. He was accused of murdering the police commissioner in Canberra. But as you read through the timeline, Michael Eastman, his story was so interesting. His father's involvement, he went to a Freemason Demolay school. His mother at one point took out an AVO on him when he was in his early 30s, I think. And of course, Michael himself was placed inside the bureaucracy in the Treasury Department, funny enough. And of course, you see Michael started to act out on the things that happened to him, and naturally he was full of rage. Well, they tried to pin the murder of this police commissioner on him. He spent 17 years in jail, and then it was quashed. You see, that's what they do to the whistleblowers.
Yeah.
They put them on a legal treadmill from hell until people either suicide themselves or they end up in jail. I would go so far as to say, Jeff, if you were to get every prisoner in Australia, if you could actually sit down and interview them all, I would suggest probably 80% or more are actually people that were abused inside this network. Through reading those near on 4,000 testimonies, there were many that actually said, you know, I got involved with drugs and alcohol to numb the pain.
That's right.
Then I ended up in jail and those sorts of things. I would go so far as to say that there's probably 80% of people that are in jail that have found themselves on a path to destruction because of what was done to them, I believe.
Absolutely. And the public would be amazed if they were down at one of these lodges and they knew who was frequenting these meetings. You'd be seeing principals, doctors, lawyers, politicians,
bankers.
Yep, all the high-profile members of society engaging in cloak and dagger activity.
Yeah, on a local level, those Freemason lodges that are in the area of which you live are often filled with people that I call whisper gatherers. Okay, so these are the people that you would often talk to. So perhaps like you say, the teachers, the principals. It also includes bank managers,
Yep.
local area command in the police.
Yep.
Charity organisations, road lives, they're accurate at a local level. You know, they capture the whispers before they become a roar. These are the people in your local community that will spread gossip to slander and target a person or a business, right?
Exactly.
And there's usually some connection there. I constantly tell people it's very good intel to know who's frequenting those Masonic lodges.
Absolutely.
Because it's very important, very important. And as far back as this abuse goes, back to the colonial days, Jeff, where there was actually 2 ships stationed in Sydney Harbour. Each one of them housed 500 boys. Now, that's 1,000 boys, isn't it? You know, there was nowhere to run. We were a penal colony, you know. And then you move forward to things like 1906, when they decided to start the Mount Penang Boys Home. That was when it was first being toyed with and drafted, areas selected and whatever. And in 1912, that boys' home opened. And the horrendous abuse that went on within Penang Boys Home there at Gosford for decades and decades. And then they broke it down into smaller homes, like your Parramatta Girls' Home, your Durrick, and then, of course, in the 30s, the charities and religious organisations started opening them up. And the common denominator, the head honchos of all these religions, all these charities, all of them come out of a Freemason Demolay school. All of them. Generation to generation to generation to generation.
Absolutely.
And of course,
It's
here
a
we are
common
now in
theme.
Australia, and
We've
we've
covered
got
it before.
generational politicians. We've got generational judiciary. We've got generational police command. Hello? Anybody seeing the network yet?
Exactly, and it goes further to where a lot of these Masons get special privileges, and you could be working in a company and think, how come I didn't get that promotion? I've been working harder than that person, and now they got the new offers, they got the new company car. You got to look a bit further. Maybe they're a member of a lodge. Maybe they've been putting work in
Exactly.
again for the brotherhood. And you see a lot of people as well.
I watched.
Yeah, I've even seen people, they'll put a compass and set square on the back of their vehicle, and then they notice they don't get pulled up as much, if at all.
Also, I would ask people to consider those that they might know or perhaps see on the television or whatever. It's really important to join the dots on whether these people often live a lifestyle that their income doesn't necessarily support. You know, like what is reported to be their income doesn't necessarily support their lifestyle. I personally know a number of people like that. I didn't realise it at the time. It wasn't until years later that I put it together. And then I watched a very interesting video made by David Icke, where he says he was in Australia and he became aware of the fact that Freemasons have a credit card that's unrecorded, unlimited, if you like. You know, they have access to funds that aren't really accounted for, so they're imaginary funds. I knew in many years ago, I knew a girl quite well. Her name was Simone Holsaffel. She ran a company called Shack Communications. She was, in fact, an advisor for Tony Abbott when he was freshly elected for the member of Warringah. I didn't happen to meet Simone until many years later. And Simone opened a business called Shack Communications with Astrid Shobo, who is the wife of the former member for Broadbeach, Stephen Shobo, right? And I observed that the lifestyle lived by these people far outweighed what would reasonably be expected to be their income. And it wasn't until I actually saw that video of David Icke's that particular piece of the puzzle came together. Simone Holsaffel, for argument's sake, had a lot of issues, especially with her mother, and has appeared before ICAC many, many times because of her connections within the Liberal Party and questions being asked and whatever, but yet nothing seems to come of it because the judiciary and ICAC's all just a big Freemason snow job, you know. It's just a theatre played out for the people. But the fact of the matter is, we have to come back to Bill Heffernan's speech. If you and I know that incest and pedophilia is wrong, we also know those who cover up for child rapists are equally as guilty. So we have no business complying with anything any politician asks of us. Suppression orders are wrong. These particular suppression orders are wrong, but also every other sort of suppression order that plays out in our courts today, especially in relation to the child rapists, whose names from the get-go are suppressed. Now, they make out like, oh, that's to protect the victim. No, it's not. No, it's not. That's to protect their Freemason Demolay network of filth.
Exactly.
They get hauled before the courts. Nothing happens. They get virtually no sentence. I mean, Milton Okapoulos, the Labor politician, convicted of assaulting 13 boys, got paroled because because Commissioner James Rowland Wood was sitting as the head of the parole board.
See,
How obvious does the corruption have to be before average Joe like you and me go, you know what? We don't comply with anything these people say. No masks. You want to fine me? Yep, give me your fine. It's toilet paper. You know, your fines are worth nothing. I'm not going to live in fear of you people. You people are the scum of the earth. Any politician that's not, any police officer that's not rounding up the pedophiles, and they know who they are, because remember, Senator Effernan said it's a police document. You know, so you got no business complying. You got no business complying with any of these people on anything.
absolutely, their behaviour is unlawful, and it's all very much compromised when they occupy high-level positions of power, and then they're also making donations as well, and people are reluctant to speak about them because they don't want to cut off one of their sponsors. So they've really taken...
Charity organisations, all charity organisations are an absolute front. You only have to look at the Mayor of Gosford Council, Laurie Marr, who started out that coastal homes shelter crap, you know, supposedly for homeless people. And it's just all a front, you know, it's just a mirage of, oh, well, they're involved with charity, they must be a good person. No, these people are not good people. We know what the Salvation Army did to boys. We know what Laurie Marr did to boys. We know what Alistair Webster did to boys. And I mean, Alistair Webster, the former federal member for Macquarie, you know, who was the superintendent of Durrick Boys Home, up until a few years ago, he was there was a organisation for retired parliamentarians, right? Well, he was in charge of that, a social type thing. You know, there's videos on YouTube you can get where he gave a speech in Parliament at the Foundation for Kids charity, right? Now, the Foundation for Kids stuff was actually targeting the children of people who had parents in jail. And he's down there in Parliament now, it's 2013, I think it was, giving this speech about this charity that he's involved in. Charities are used as a shield to give off a veneer of, oh, must be a good person. Right. Well, we know what happened in the Salvation Army boys' homes. We know what happened in the Red Cross boys' homes. We know what happened in all the religious boys' homes. So these are all just fronts. They are all just fronts.
Exactly right. And you see the psychological patterns these criminals exhibit. Once they get away with their crimes, it gives them more confidence to keep doing so. And they're in the public eye and they're smiling. Now they're getting really cocky. And we're fighting for the last remnants of our freedom. And it makes it hard here. We can't even go down to the lodge and protest because we've even lost that right. So sometimes it feels like we're in a helpless state of panic here in Victoria.
And I suppose if you're in Victoria, it feels like no one cares. You know, the reality is millions of Australians live in other states and they should in fact be convoying. They should. Every truck driver, every mobile homeowner, every normal average Joe Aussie should in fact be blocking the streets in and around their state governors and the Governor-General in Canberra and demanding that our governments are removed. These are the people who control issuing the writs. I personally, Jeff, I'm doing everything I can to try and motivate people. I'm constantly calling for convoys to happen. The people must rise up. You must have boots on the ground. We outnumber them, Australia. There's 25.5 million of us, and in Victoria there's 6.5 million people and only 26,000 cops. You know, I went through on my lives in Facebook land with all the ratio of number of police to people. We outnumber them, but it's going to take boots on the ground. You're going to have to take action. How long do people in Northern Territory or Queensland sit around watching the decimation of their fellow mates in Victoria before they decide, you know what, I've got to start driving? You know, I've got to start driving. I've got to get up there to the administrator of the Northern Territory who resides in Darwin, and we've got to start surrounding the house. You know, if you're able to travel to the Victorian border, then you need to do so. You need to get in the car and you need to run these blockades that they've got, and you need to say, no, you don't do this to my mates in Victoria. You don't. And if you think you guys are going to come after us, I mean, we're not going to sit, if you're a Queenslander, you're not going to sit there and wait for it to happen in Queensland, are you? Is that really what you're going to do?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and then you tie this in with the fluoride, Jeff, and I believe a lot of people are calcified because of the fluoride. Well documented what that does to critical thinking. And I'll highlight this point for you, Jeff. That 67-year-old grandmother that was arrested down there in Victoria at the park a few weeks ago, there must have been 30 people standing there filming that. And yet there was only 6 police officers. And those 30 people that were standing there filming it did not have the conscious awareness to go, hang on a sec, 6 to 30. Let's put the cameras down. Let's step forward now. Let's step between this woman and these 6 police officers. There's 30 of us and 6 of them. We outnumber them 5 to 1. But that instant reaction that should be there when you watch evil unfold right in front of your eyes, people, average Joe people, standing there like statues. That
Yeah,
you've
exactly.
got to.
And if it doesn't strike a chord with people and inspire them to get up and fight for freedom now, then the future's looking very grim. Pregnant woman being thrown around the other day at Hilda Beach. I mean, this is devastating. How the police can do this to people. It's unlawful activity. And the elderly seem to be punished for a lot of this as well. They target the most vulnerable people.
Yes, they
Ones that
do.
should be protected and supported. We're very grateful for all that you've done, Karen, as well, voicing the corruption, speaking it out on your platform, because you don't leave soldiers on the battlefield to just get used up as cannon fodder. You know, we've got people that are mentally feeling it, physically and financially. Once they hit us on every level, then our capacity to react is really weakened. And we got to pray for a miracle at the moment.
Got to pray for a Conroy. We've got to pray for people who just decide, you know what, this is enough, no more. I will in fact be boots on the ground. I myself, there's a big march happening in Auckland on Saturday. I will be there. The only politician, I'll just point this out for people that might be listening, the only politician in New Zealand that is calling out the scam for what it is a gentleman by the name of Billy T. And he runs a political party called Advance New Zealand. Now, I'll just give you a bit of insight, Jeff, on the censoring going on. Billy T's party, he's just, from what I can tell, he's just an average Joe that about 14 weeks ago decided this is enough. I've got to call out this bullshit. I'm going to have to stand up and say something. Well, in about I think it's about 14 or 15 weeks since this started, he's managed to get a political party going. He has over 2 million people that have connected with his party, like watching lives or, you know, been to the website. I've read through the policies of the Advance New Zealand Party, and I believe they are good, honest people until proven otherwise. I believe they are. They are the only ones calling out the scam that is this corona. And the censoring, honestly, Jeff, the censoring that's going on towards this Billy T. Now, they censor his Facebook lives. They've hacked his iMessage. The mainstream media refuse to have him on much with regards to debating and all that sort of stuff. It's staggering. And I would say to any of my cousins in New Zealand, if you want my opinion, the only people right now to put a number in a box for or a tick next to is in fact the Advanced New Zealand Party. They are the only people calling out the filth. They are the only ones. And you have to look at that, Jeff, and the fact that they're going into so much overdrive to silence this bloke tells me he's over the target. It's just like me with Facebook. I had nearly 5,000 friends. I had about 30,000 followers. And, you know, they just shut the whole page down. And I just look at that and I go, I'm on the target. I'm on the target.
You
know.
certainly are, and you're reaching enormous numbers of people. But what we need is a honest political party to take over and replace these corrupt ones. I'm very much anti-establishment, but if we can get some people that are genuinely concerned for the future and want to instill good, wholesome values into the community and look after people, then, you know, we need something, an alternative to what's in place. Absolutely.
We really need genuine electorate-based representatives. No more political parties, right?
That's
No
right,
more
because
political
we see
parties.
it all
Just
the time.
genuine average Joes. If you get 100, and I think there's 128 or 148 politicians in Victoria, state politicians, what Victoria needs is 148 average Joes. Because you know what? Average Joes are reasonable people. We can sit down and have a discussion and get a consensus on, you know, decisions that need to be made. We really can. You know, we can differ but find compromise. Whereas I think most of us know, any of us that have watched Question Time in any parliament, I believe most of us know that's a disgrace. So if you want that to change, you need to stop voting for political parties, you know, and you need to start looking for a local that wants to serve you.
Absolutely, because these politicians have betrayed our trust. It has been happening for hundreds of years. And what we're seeing a lot as well, you know, the false promises. And then once they're elected, they just stab people in the back. We've seen that.
That's right.
With the
I'll
COVID
just talk for a
restrictions.
moment about a common theme here. The Advanced New Zealand Party has their policies up on their website. It's really important that people go and read those, because they've also got one there about a citizens initiated referendum. Now, this is something that Michael Holt and the Advance Australia people talk about often, and it actually needs to happen. If we've got any hope of having a democracy in this system, and the system needs overhauling, believe you me, but a citizens initiated referendum is a very good place to start. And there are a lot of things that the Advanced New Zealand Party are calling on, even questioning things like, why was Jacinda Ardern meeting with Hillary Clinton? Why did that happen, and what was discussed? And the same with Bill Gates and all these things. Of course, the mainstream media don't want to talk about it, but average Joes want to talk about it. Average Joes want to know, why are our politicians handing over millions and millions and millions of dollars to these organisations? We haven't been asked. We certainly don't go to work to pay our taxes for our elected so-called representatives to hand over to their Freemason mates. And that's what goes on. It's money laundering on a grand scale.
Exactly.
Jeff, can we talk about solutions for a minute? Because
that'd be nice. That would give people some hope and reassurance. Any type of strategy, in fact.
I've been thinking about this, and we really need to get a convoy happening. You know, in the 70s, Jeff, the truck drivers rose up against unfair taxes and tolls that they were being asked to pay, and it was so effective. You know, a protest like I'm suggesting is really actually a takeover. You're demanding that your governors indeed sack your parliament. You outnumber these people enormously, but it is going to take boots on the ground. I was thinking about the corruption too, Jeff. I was thinking about the corruption, given that the scale of the corruption. I think what needs to happen is, for a period of time, that there is only one bank allowed to function, right? Just one bank, no other bank, just one bank, because the money laundering and things that go on is staggering when you delve into it, like I have, you know. And of course, we all know about Westpac now and the Commonwealth Bank and all that sort of stuff, but it's still going on. So I thought, okay, ways around this. So if we can get a civilian takeover, in a sense, and get the governors to issue the writs countrywide, and of course, everyone's a wake up to no more political parties, elect a true local. Initially, what I'd do is I'd shut down all the banks, all of them. I would actually wipe every debt, okay? So personal loans, mortgages, the whole lot, I'd wipe the whole lot. And I don't want to hear from people to say, oh, but I only had $20,000 debt and this person had $100,000 debt. I'm not interested. I would just wipe all debt, okay? I would stop the use of FPOST, right? I was given this a lot of thought because it's about money laundering, facial recognition, limiting people, right? This is what's going on with all this 5G technology is they want the ability to be able to stop you accessing your bank account, your place of work if necessary. Also entering shops and all this stuff. That's what all this QR code and shit's about, you know. And I think Thanos Paniatis and Raphael and people like yourself are doing a great job exposing how this technology can really be used to abuse.
That's
So in
exactly
order
what
to
they're going
stop
to use it
that,
for, nefarious reasons. These facial
so in
recognition
order to stop
cameras
that,
will detect people and any type of misbehavior, they'll be docked on points and shut out from the whole system. So that's why they want to make it cashless. We've seen it as well with the supermarkets. Woolworths has put out flyers warning people that they are going for this strategy. So
people need to pay attention. This is real. That technology
we've got to be
gives them the ability to lock you out of health services, shops, your bank account. Like, it's serious. It's frightening, actually.
Absolutely, and it's always a concern to have a police visit because you've empowered the public, you've given them information, and then they're looking at that as incitement. So we're not telling people to get out to the public areas, rip down those COVID signs, and make use of the property which taxpayers' money people have funded. We're not saying get out and hand out flyers to warn people of the pandemic, but people should make their own decisions about how much their freedom and how much they value that, and then take their own actions.
And people should also make a decision, a conscious decision, about whether you should indeed obey any rule or regulation set down to you by liars who cover up for child rapists.
Absolutely.
I don't believe you should be listening to anything from a person like that.
100%.
But going forward, I was thinking, in order to limit the corruption while you have to go through a process to expose it, I was thinking the only way you can really do that is by just having one bank. Everything had to come and go through one bank, right? You would have to stop all the FPOST. We're going back to a cash society. And firstly, there would be no more of this facial recognition crap. There has to be a full civil inquiry into Freemasonry. And I mean civil inquiry, you know. These people have to be outed, the network has to be exposed, and then there needs to be a major campaign done about educating the masses on how this network of breeding has been rolled out for over 300 years. I believe there needs to be a complete refit of media. Nobody that comes out of one of these Freemason schools should be allowed on a television. They should not be allowed to print an article. They should not be allowed to be on the radio. I mean, I know who they are because I've researched them all. But there needs to be a massive education system done for Australians and indeed New Zealanders, explaining how this network is woven, the reason why that Masonic lodge sits in the district of which you live, and the reason you know nothing about it. You know?
Very powerful
and
statement,
I think
Karen.
if you get 227 average Joes from across the country, I mean, well, why couldn't we start a party called Average Joes? Or why couldn't we start a party that says no Freemasons in office, right? Like, no, I reckon it needs to be maybe called the Average Joe Party. And in order to be involved in that particular party, you cannot have come from a Freemason school. You cannot have any connection to Freemason Demolay. You know, I mean, that's how you weed them out. Where did they go to school and who's their daddy?
Absolutely.
You know, I would like to see it compulsory for every candidate in any sort of election, whether it be a union official, the party, you know, party executives, whether it be religious organisations, whether it be media, associations, politicians, the whole lot. I believe that everybody in public life should have to publicise where they went to school, which primary school, which high school, and who's their daddy.
Exactly. There should be strict background checks, and that should be a prerequisite before anybody is considered an ideal candidate or
for anything,
for a position of power. Absolutely.
whether it be the local charity, whether it be your local police command. These details about where they went to school and who's their daddy should be public knowledge, available to anyone at any time.
Exactly. And for people that don't have the amount of time to put into research like what you have done, which has been enormous, they can also pick up on the Freemason handshakes, another telltale sign, and occult numerology. Whenever you hear them say 33 quite often and acting suspicious, these are also identifying markers.
I'll just give you a little update too on this. There's something I'm sort of exploring in more detail now. What people need to know is some public schools, government-funded schools, are in fact Freemason schools. Now, I'll give you a classic example of how to find them. Okay, I went to Fairfield High School in New South Wales. Our school badge was the initials and a picture of a creek. Okay, Scott Morrison went to Sydney Boys High School, and you'll notice the Sydney Boys High School badge has all Masonic symbolism all over it. That's another good way of, you look at the school badge, and if there's any sort of Masonic symbolism on it, so we're talking about flames and crosses and wreaths and stars and a myriad, anything that looks off, horses and all this sort of stuff, anything that looks off, okay, that's a Freemason school. Those school badges are key in identifying them. I don't necessarily know how to interpret all the symbolism, Jeff, as I'm sure, you've got to be in the network to know, but I've researched a lot of it enough now to know the stars and like College Q in Melbourne, that school badge, very telling. Okay, so that's another way of identifying the Freemason Demolay schools, because you've got to understand some of them are in fact government-funded schools.
Very powerful interview, Karen. You've once again blown the viewers away with enormous information that they can go and research for themselves. Was there any...
We've got to get boots on the ground, Jeff.
Absolutely.
We've got to get boots
Is there
on
any
the ground.
last statements you'd like to leave for the people suffering here in Victoria?
Yeah. Each of you need to think about why you would obey the instructions given to you by dirty, lying, child rapist politicians. They're covering up for it. Why would you obey these people? Please start being boots on the ground. And Jeff, I really love watching your videos where you go out into the street and you actually talk to the people on the street, and you just get a few comments off each other. They are very powerful, Jeff, and I hope you continue to do them regularly, because people like me, we need to see what our fellow Australians are saying. And the only way that's going to happen is like people like you going out and talking to your average Joes in and around where you live. So keep it up.
Thank you very much, Karen. That's wonderful hearing. And I'm very grateful for all your support. You keep doing fantastic work and you're making great results that are coming forward. Thank you.
And I would like my friends and followers from Facebook land to know I do have a YouTube channel. It's just Karen Brewer Bush Telegraph. That's the only means of communication now I have with people. It's not as user friendly as Facebook, and I am struggling a bit with it, Jeff. But I do try and answer comments and things. I'm getting better. That's the only means I have of communicating with my fellow Australians and our New Zealand cousins at the moment. Yeah.
Well, let's hope you're able to avoid any YouTube censorship and you're able to continue broadcasting. Wonderful effort, and it's people like you fighting for freedom that give people hope for the future.
And
Thanks
it's really
again.
up to you and me. It's really up to the you and me's, Jeff,
Wonderful.
Okay,
Welcome
thanks for having me.
Take care.
Okay, bye, Jeff. Bye.
Bye.